Let's talk about the Birthright Players Secrets range, which was a fairly important range in the Birthright selection of books from the mid to late 90s. There were 15 of them. They were short, and 2 of them were special editions, but 32 pages with a gatefold screen, better than the actual DM screens you usually got, which were only trifold. So they're actually not bad for that purpose, but they were aimed at players. This is the first thing to bring up, is that they are aimed at players who might want to play a particular player PC available domain. So you want to play Ilien? Oh well, you could get this book and it has a bunch of extra things. Halscarpa, you could go for that one. Not every PC friendly domain, because in Birthright some domains are closed off from PCs running them, but not every PC friendly domain is detailed by any means, nowhere near, but many are. There, as I say, there were 15. 2 were special edition, essentially. One I think was a convention special, which I have, which is Hogan Mark. You see it's not got a gatefold, it's in black and white. It is still, I think, 32 pages, yep, 32 pages, and then a limited cover rather than the whole gatefold. And then there was a PDF exclusive you can still get from the Internet Archive at birthright.net via the Internet Archive of Mooden. And yeah, the 15 of them were split from memory. I think 3, these 2 and another one I don't own, were based in the Nordic setting, Jurek Highlands, which I've talked about in a couple of different videos recently. 2 were for demi-humans, Baruk Azhik, this one, which is the Dwarven PC domain that you can play, and there's an Elven one too called Tuarivel. There wasn't one for the 1 halfling domain. There are other dwarf and elf domains PCs can't play. There were 3, I think, 3 or 4 for these Kinasi ones, Binsada and Arya, and Kurain as well, I think. And then there were a bunch of others. All but one of the rest were for the core starting human area that you get in the core box, the Arthurian themed Anure, for instance Ilien and Ilien. There was one for the German trading Hanseatic area, Mooden, the PDF exclusive. The big problems, let's just put these out there straight up. The big problems with these, and the reason you'd think that these are a range that I would not like, are they are basically all overwritten, even by second edition standards sometimes. I mean, second edition could go all over the place. What I mean is they're 32 pages and many of them could be summed up in 8 or 12. It's partly just stuff like, oh, they're 2 column rather than 3 column, they're larger text. Some of it, the comparison to older 32 page modules is misleading, but it's also just there are often significant wastes of time and space. The most egregious of which that I can think of in is in Baruk Azhik, which has a page and a half. That half column and this whole page is about dwarven diet, ending with the excellent piece of information: in the occasional situations where trash disposal is necessary, the dwarves resort to carefully controlled composting, which is, I mean, I'm a fan of permaculture and sustainable agriculture as much as the next man, but it's a bit much for me. But basically, that's one thing. They're overwritten, there are wasted pages. You can do more, you can give more information, and all too often, as with other products from the time and since, the opportunity isn't used. And the other problem is, it's a thing that is really, I think you get a bit of it in 3rd, which is the edition I know least well. You certainly do get a bit of it in 4th in terms of how the handbooks were sold, but no, you know, not particularly obnoxiously. But really in 2nd, what you have is TSR realising that there are more players than DMs, or at least there are inactive play, there are more players than DMs. There may be other people who just buy to collect or to read, but it doesn't actually really matter what books you write for them. They will buy and collect and read it if they are generally into the setting. But if there are more players than there are DMs, really you want to sell, if you're going to increase your sales of books, so the theory went, you want to sell it to to players because there are more of them. And so the Player's Handbook series, the PHBR series, of which there were 15 or 16, were very popular, the brown leather ones, and compare, you know, more books in that than either the DMGR or the Historical Reference, the other two faux leather cover series, many more, twice as many as either, really. And the point was that, you know, if someone was playing a thief or a ranger, they'd go and get that book, and that would have lots of options for them. And the DM might also have a copy. In some groups, you might have a couple of a book being sold. There's some flaws in that sales plan, it has to be said, because what happens is you might just end up with the DM buying one copy of each book if they wanted to, or you might have one player buying it, in which case you're increasing gross copies sold but not necessarily the net on any individual book. Obviously there are big marketing and sales issues throughout second edition, even into first edition, actually going back. You see 5th edition partly has squared this circle, or circled this square, by making books new, the core rulebook expansions, both things like Tasha's Cauldron of Everything or Xanathar's whatever it is, that book. You have a bit that's like, oh, these are some options for players, but you also have new monsters, you have new spells, but you also have new mechanics. Xanathar's goes in for DM mechanics, particularly, for instance. And there's only some that are less like that. Most of the rulebook expansions are aimed at both player and DM, and so there's a realistic chance, a better chance of getting multiple sales. Here, anyway, that digression over, the point is here that you could hypothetically, as long as the production on this wasn't too expensive, and with the gatefold I worry that it might have been, but you could say, well, in the ultimate Birthright campaign where every PC has a domain, you could have them running Telinie, Ilien, Tuonen and Endia, and that you could sell those 4 books, and it might well be that some DMs even bought some extra ones too. Again, business sense aside, that's the theory. The theory is you're selling more books into the group by the fact that there are things for the players to get. You get a bit of that in other book lines as well, of course. Now, the cost of this, the problem with this, is barring any stylistic issues, bits of in-character fluff and stuff like that that are really par for the course for lots of those early to mid-90s era, even pushing into the late 90s in some lines, books where you have lots of in-character fluff to introduce stuff. It's not so much that happens in all kinds of books. It's prevalent in PC books, but more that there is often a tension about who's meant to know what and where and how and who decides what. So a big thing is that each book has a fairly big section of rumours, secrets and plots. And so, for instance, just to read a sample on this section, is designed to provide a DM with ideas for adventures in Baruk Azhik and to provide players with story threads they would like to follow. Some might be short adventures, others might turn into long campaigns or open new opportunities or difficulties for the Overthane of Baruk Azhik. And then there's a rumour list in this example, and the list of secrets and plots, which there are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's something which, the problem there is, of course, that there could be secrets their DM would want to keep from their players, but because you need to sell to the player and get them interested, oh, I really want to do this, you have to give the information in the way that meets both, and so you get instead this might or might not be the case. You get this particularly a thing you see particularly egregiously in World of Darkness and sometimes Deadlands books of the same era, where you just have a kind of like, who knows what's going on here? And then in Deadlands, which even had Marshall DM only sections, it says, oh, well, maybe you'll have to decide. You think, no, just give me the juice. And those were both ones, of course, that sort of meta plot. So you as a DM were buying books to find out the next bit of the story. A really horrible clash, I think, in terms of the purpose of the books. These, that's less true of, but the tension is brought instead by the fact that they can't tell you the definite solution to stuff, because then the player would know. So yeah, there is a tension. Basically, you really want these to be DM books with photocopyable pages for players or something, which is pretty much what you get in the core setting books, that you get, you know, the DM will give you the information you need from the book for your domain. Now, what I'm going to do for the rest of this time is talk about three, I think in particular, that I gave another look to, just to give some sample feelings and thoughts about them. One thing, and this is a big thing and positive about them, is that they are beautifully produced, as basically everything in the Birthright range was. TSR in the 90s, and I've got books from most of the big companies from that era, and since, you know, I've got not most of the big companies, but plenty of books from different producers since. And in terms of real quality products, TSR at that era have some of the nicest stuff out there, even when it's weird or useless. There are other companies that have really nice things too, and I'm thinking like all the colour plates in World of Darkness books, but just the graphic design by, in this case, Robert J. Gallagher. But yeah, just this wonderful gatefold. You see it in all kinds of ranges, but for the Birthright stuff, it's really the art and layout, the fact that you have these unique page designs and stuff, which except in one or two cases where you get weird text clashes because it's been designed in colour, are usually really, really nice. The things you get in each of these books, you get a background for why your PC has become the regent, or the context in which they've become the regent. Note that in a moment. You get a background to the realm, geography, including its provinces. You get generally stuff on culture and locals, and NPCs. Some stuff about the mechanics of what's going on there. Rumours, secrets and plots, and then strategies at the end, which is these are things as a player you might need to think about. And that's not a bad mix of pieces of information for the DM and or player to have access to. The big thing about how your regent comes to power is that each of these is written with an NPC king or governor or whatever to begin with, and they need to be got out of the way for your PC to take over, because you don't play 11th level dwarven fighters, you play typically 3rd level, much like Dark Sun for that. 3rd level PC is standard, and each of these comes up with a reason why this change has happened. And this is interesting, partly because it is a kind of, in the smallest sense possible, and not a pejorative sense, a metaplot development. It's a way of changing the world, and it's got to make sense. So for Ilien, the Mage Lord, and it's a kind of domain run by powerful wizards, city-state run by powerful wizards, it's that Muran Aglondier, his name's Muran, I think, yep, has died, he's died, possibly in suspicious circumstances, and Roger Aglondier, his son, has succeeded. You don't have to be Roger Aglondier, they make the point you could be whoever you want. They say these might be relationships that could help or might matter for X or Y reasons, but the point is that they give you a PC who has a natural claim to the throne. And there's an argument for pre-gens in all kinds of contexts. That's a discussion for another day. You don't have to do it. In Binsada, the queen has a hereditary illness similar to dementia, and she has basically had to retire, given her magical power to you, the rulership over the land, that is, and you're in disguise as her when you're dealing with people in public. That's because you're her sister, though again you don't have to be her sister. And Baruk Azhik, the Overthane, the former Overthane of the Dwarven Kingdom, has, because he knows that his kingdom is losing the war against the Orogs. By the way, again, in terms of design, the coats of arms are really lovely, I should say. And so are the faction unique toppers, like those of the dwarves, and people from the Canarsie lands, from Cities of the Sun, and people from the Arthurian setting. But yeah, in Baruk Azhik, he's decided, he's done a ritual, basically become a ghost, but a really powerful ghost. He's not a ghost, he's a sort of stone spirit who's there to gain power and wisdom to aid his people, and you know, you have ended up being nominated and becoming the new one. You're not a specific PC in that context, but that's the background to why the king has gone. And the fact that in each of these cases, the parallel, when I did a review for this, the hybrid sourcebook King of the Giant Downs, is that you have a regent who doesn't massively want the job, but will only hand it over when someone worthy has proven themselves to rule the Giant Downs. Here you have those old regents out of the way, and they're quite interesting plot setting up ways of doing it. I think those are all three really good examples of how to do it. Some of them are a bit less inspiring. It's kind of like, oh, someone's abdicated. Others are interesting. So, for instance, how Scarpa is just old guy abdicates in your favour, which is pretty much the most generic thing possible. And I think Arya is also a pretty generic one. But yeah, others are more interesting. So yeah, that sets up plot things. And to give the sub-reviews, the fact that for Ilien this means that you have all kinds of rivals and you don't know who's out for your blood, you don't know what the factions are. That is actually, sorry, here's a particular point of tension actually with the player DM information. NPCs don't have alignments put on their stat blocks, and it's kind of assumed, you know, this rest of the stats are there, but I guess maybe it's assumed you're allowed to know. I think in possibly Binsada there is an incredibly obnoxious habit of all of them having a bloodline ability of undetectable thoughts, which is obviously a MacGuffin to stop you not knowing what they're thinking. But the alignments are removed. But in some cases, the flavor text actually gives away the real factional background to that NPC. In other cases, it doesn't. It depends on the book, but none of them are very good at that because really they've been written for DMs, basically, as expansions of the core sets they're attached to. So yeah, Ilien, you have this thing set up where you've got a cousin, you've got a daughter who's your lieutenant, you've got a cousin who may not be interested in the throne himself, but his sons might be, and there's this kind of tension about how you keep them on side. There's a very powerful Canarsie exile who's a merchant lord, who is also an organised crime lord, who may or may not be loyal to you. You're quite small, and as you come onto the throne, you control lots of magical power outside your kingdom, but fairly little political and military power. Interesting setup. Binsada, the fact that your cousin is again a rival in that case, and the army's general is particularly devoted to the rightful queen, but you're not actually the rightful queen and they don't know it. You're doing it to save the kingdom, but you know that what if they find out? What if things develop from there? Baruk Azhik has fewer of those because there aren't the dynamic family relationships. There's actually a lot less tension in Baruk Azhik. You could blame it on it being a lawful good realm, but I'm not convinced about that. I think at its best it picks up some very good lawful good threads. It doesn't exploit the tensions available to a lawful good realm, like the issues of order and liberty and kind of quite questions of balancing good in this case an existential war against the Orogs. It just doesn't go into those things that are interesting for lawful good characters and lawful good philosophies, if you like. And I'm a supporter of alignment in D&D to a large degree, so that's a shame for me. Then you've got your kind of history and geography, and these are one of the areas where you typically get it overwritten. For instance, Binsada, you get a 7-page section on that, so that's a quarter of it, of the book. You get an 8-page section in Ilien on the same, and in Baruk Azhik you get an 8-page section. That's obviously the standard, about a quarter, and it might make sense to say, well, surely a quarter should be for this, but a lot of it's not very interesting. Getting fairly bland and generic descriptions of the flora and fauna and kind of just like pop fantasy descriptions of this realm has had this history. Often I think you'd do better with a calendar date list, an annals list over a page of the history, and then a similar bullet pointed list of major flora and fauna, and maybe kind of most important places in a province. And I think Ilien does come close to that, to be fair, somewhat, for the... It kind of has a slightly more systematic list of things, which helps, whereas Baruk Azhik, on the other hand, seems confused and repeats itself. But yeah, in fact, I think Ilien of these three is the best written, with a reasonable city description as well for the city you're going to be spending lots of time in, because it's the centerpiece of your whole realm. For context, just to give an example of the gatefold, here you've got the realm of Ilien, which is one province. It's this small yellow highlighted section on this regional map, and then you have, there is the map of the Free City of Ilien, and that is particular depiction of some stone circles you control, and then a list of all of your holdings, or the holdings relevant to you. Some of the others, and this is fairly typical, have castle maps for your castle. I think in this case, I think in Ilien, it's internal. It's maybe in the centre. Yeah, I think that's a very marginal inclusion. Again, probably wasted space. And I say that not because castle maps are never relevant, or couldn't be relevant, but I think it's a good example of filling space with something which you could, even at that point, you could probably just make up yourself. Because none of them are that exciting. My point is, none of the castle maps are that exciting. At least the province and city maps, you could imagine having some wider use. Certainly the province maps, and in Ilien's case the city map as well, because of how central the city is. So yeah, the history land sections tend to be, and in this case you also get an 8-page section on the Free City because it's so important. Comparatively, Baruk Azhik, you get that kind of time on culture, and then on the dwarves of Baruk Azhik, and then on Binsada you get that much on the current people, and on then a bit more on the capital city and NPCs. So you tend to have land and geography, and then a section about the politics of the realm and key NPCs. Again, in that case, I think it suffers generally from being long and overwritten. You can read them quickly. The one thing with this is you are talking about a 32-page book, which isn't that long, and you can kind of blast through in an hour or something. So even if it feels like a waste of space, it's not going to be a massive waste of time. The NPC sections are, and I have looked at one. I mean, I've touched on it when I went through the core box set, and I've definitely looked at it particularly in King of the Giant Downs, but there's a bit of it in Uruk Highlands too. You get a list of NPCs with stats and descriptions, as I say. They have these quite nice portraits. The interior art, in this case, for instance, is by Dave Mackay. Cartography is usually by Diesel, I think, though in this one case it's by Dennis Korth. Yeah, not everything has Tony Skudlow art, but most things do, or many things do at least. For instance, the cover art on that is, and a bunch of the design elements are at least inspired by him. He was the core range artist, and he's good. The NPCs tend to have an interesting mix, not always, but tend to. I like in Ilien, you've got your own regent, Roga, and you have your daughter, who's a priestess, who holds, I think she is a regent in her own right on that basis, for the Temple in Assyria. No, she's not, she's just a priestess there. There's then your cousin, there's then the guild lord El Hadid, who is nice and sinister. There's a guy who is a military commander, and that's it. There's a couple of points of tension there. If you imagine it as a DM book, that's a useful resource. It only takes 3 pages to set up several characters who could be interesting and useful, and which if in that case you're sharing with the PCs as well. Fairly efficient short descriptions of the holdings involved, usually a couple of paragraphs each, and there are these 2 rival temples. There are the source holdings that, as in this case, you're a wizard, so you get, because there are 4 types of holdings: law, politics, and you do have a law holding because you hold Endia itself. Temples, which are, PCs can hold these as well. They can hold not just land, but those other things. Temples are religious power. Guild is economic power, and that includes organised crime to a degree. And then sources are magical power, which comes from more or less pristine nature. The more pristine, the less settled, the more powerful the source. Endia itself, Ilien, Endia is also a city. Ilien in this case has law of 7, very developed city, source of 0, and so as the Wizard King, you're having to draw power from elsewhere. And then, so it gives information about that. And in this case, in this case, it gives descriptions of the particular heart of the source of each province, so that there is some sense of like, this is a place you might end up going to. Then the rumours, secrets and plots. In this case, they divide them differently across books. For instance, this has some rumours, 4 rumours, 3 secrets, and 2 plots, and then domain strategy. In Baruk Azhik, it's a list of rumours, almost like a traditional rumour list. It's not a table, but it's almost like a rumour table. And then just a combined list of everything else. And it depends how the author distinguishes them. In this case, this is by Kevin Melker, Ilien is. You have rumours. There's a unicorn in the Erebanian forest, the kind of powerful magical forest in the Elfwood. And apparently it's been wounded, but is it real, and can you find it, and how's it been wounded? Is any of it true? A new source. There is apparently a new source is it in Ilien itself? Anyway, there is a new source which, lost, buried elven ruin, which if you could find you, because you're a Wizard King and you use both lore and magical power to gain regency points, you could get more power from. And then trouble at Tamlay. There's rumours about problems on the Isle of Tamlay off your coast. And then spiders coming down the river, presumably from the Spiderfell, from the great Ornshalan, the kind of mutated monster, master monster called the Spider, to terrorise the land. And why is it happening? So those are some things you could look into. Secrets, these are things like any domain in Cerealia. Ilien has its secrets. This is interesting here, that this is Melker. There is an attempt to make sure that the DM would decide, this as the regent, but the DM decides what happens with them. That's actually the right balance if you're going to have a mixed book like this. Is for instance, that you could hold a great deal of personal wealth, but it might well reasonably be hidden and you have to search for it. Magical items, some of them might not be available. One, particularly the most powerful, the Staff of Power, is lost, so you're going to have to search for that. Spies, the names of the 5 key spies, but it's up to them if they come to you and serve you. And then plots, Archmage who wants to take over your sources, and El Hadid is bringing lots of weapons into the city. He's apparently loyal to you, but why is he bringing so many weapons in then, in that case? And they're not being traded. And then domain strategy, there's 6 points. Protect Ilien's resources, pursue adventure, events and actions, watch domain finances. The domain strategy stuff, though pertinent to a player, you can imagine, is never very interesting. So yeah, I like Ilien a lot. Binsada they're nomads. Sometimes, by the way, the demographics on this stuff doesn't make any sense when you're like, so there's like 20,000 people who live in this whole place. They have an army, albeit they could realistically have an army of a couple of thousand, if they are, in that nomadic lifestyle, sometimes tend toward having more people theoretically available for military service, depending on the context. But you don't really need populations that are big. You need to have, it needs to be that there's 60,000, 50,000 nomads and 10,000 farmers who pay tribute to them, and then of that, a few thousand are in permanent saddle. But they're cattle herders. There's a sort of mounted Maasai thing going on, and the core dynamic of your hidden identity is really interesting in this one, as I say. Again, I've kind of summed up some of the issues and overwriting. This one is by the fairly reliable Alan Varney. Binsada is. He wrote a couple of the others as well. But yeah, there's some stuff about some clans like you more than others. There's a list of crime and justice rules, the kind of way that what you get punished for and the blood guilt prices and things like that. That's good. Stuff that's core, in this case culture, is interesting because it gives core cultural expectations, and this is actually relevant given that that is essentially a column and a half, and it gives you riding traditions, climbing standards, diet in 2 paragraphs, not a page and a half. And marriage rules and traditions. That's all relevant. That's stuff that, as a DM particularly, as you're trying to introduce players into the world, into this particular kingdom, having just a tiny nugget is really good. Hence why a list of flora and fauna is fine. I think the King of the Giant Downs, for instance, has a bit of that at the back, where it just has a list of animals and where they're found. That's useful. Long descriptions are not. And then there's also hobbies as well. Competitions, kites, birds, and ostromancy, which is the study of winds. There is some rather bad illustrations of key holding types. A local law or guild holding, the Sun Camp, a spirit cave source holding, an ancestral cairns temple holding. None of them are very good maps or very interesting. There is the map of the one city, Burdaris. There's also a town, Anduja, which is more connected to the less reputable lower caste settled people like the farmers. You get that much in that. That's a page and a half within that absolutely enormous key, because the enormous key is actually referring to single page domain map. There's no standard typography on the maps in terms of showing holdings and stuff. Then you've got the Royal Palace there. That's the Needless Castle map. You got there. I think it's the same with Ilien. There is there are family trees on the inside for those two, relevantly because they are both hereditary, and that is the region map equivalent. Notable nomads. Again, pretty standard stuff. There's the former queen, who, including her equipment. One cool thing I think is that because you get your potential regent here with the equipment they get, the magic items, as well as their magic abilities as a blooded individual. There's the high priest, who in this case, this is one of the things about the demographics. This high priest is like, oh, our goddess has said that we're to go to war, basically, and it's less. In this case, it's not so much jihad as more of a Mongol thing in terms of the feel to it. And that is particularly, if I could find this, yeah, here we go. The new domain of Binsada was founded by a nomad whose name is variously given as Chenghas Zaran and Tenghis Ran. That's actually dreadful. It's not funny. It's not even kind of so bad it's funny. Like, this is apparently a serious bit of their history. There's a guy called, Kangas Khan. Oh, wasn't he a Pokemon? No, he's a Binsadan nomad lord. It doesn't really work, especially but that the element is okay. The idea that you are you have a particular mission and expectation upon you as queen to push out and take over neighbouring lands for their own good, defeat on Shaylin, and a bit like the Ainaraeans had their own Charlemanic conquest and empire. Now you are the one doing that as somewhere between the kind of Islamic, the early Islamic invasions in the 7th century and the Mongol invasions. That's the theme they're giving, at least. It's an interesting one. Then you've got your cousin Daoud, you've got Gerard Vordian, your general, both of whom you don't want to find out that you're fake in the Deep Space Nine Pale Moonlight sense. And then there's some other guild people and the person who holds all the sources nearby. And your lieutenant of all people is a street urchin. Your trustworthy lieutenant is a 0-level street urchin, albeit with Dex 18. Quick summary of holdings and how they work. Again, this has an okay thing about, oh, these are spirit caves, maybe they work like this, maybe we could find out more. And then mechanical stuff about income and expenses, which is really useful, essential in fact. Some of that can be found in the core box sets for the different regions. Rumours and plots. So here, rumours and secrets and plots are split into rumours and plots and secrets. Rumours and plots. A rumour, General Vordian has bolted for the west. This is, again, this is that essentially, are you meant to know that he's bolted for the west, so you investigate immediately? Is it that the DM should be dropping this as a plot? Plainly it's the latter. Or it's a random event that the DM generates, but you as the player know about it straight away. Prince Daoud trying to potentially gain support to go for the regency. Then this is again, that one's fairly bland. One where an Ornshey seems to be attacking your salt mines, or maybe it's someone else. Then where is a particular ancient ruin? What is beneath your city? Those are interesting things, and that also does lead into, these are dungeon play elements, which Birthright goes back and forth on as to how, I've talked about this before, obviously multiple times in fact, but how to have adventures. Is it just that you have events, you negotiate, and you send out agents, and it's just a domain game? Well, no, it's D&D. You have a character with abilities, and it's expected that the Avengers level threats are ones you and your coterie go and deal with. And dungeons are an obvious way to do that, but it's something which you can see in the published material goes back and forth on what. Secrets, again here, there's a potential thing where your allied wizard, she has got information on the Ornshey, the Sphinx, and then an unlikely ally. You could ally with, what's the exact thing here again? It's that you've got an ally in another Ornshey, the Harpy, who's kind of, I think, neutral. But there's a question about a magical sword that might be able to help you there as well. Strategy and advice, all pretty bland. So the strength is repeatedly the rumours and secrets and plots and the setup, and the weakness is in the middle. And we'll finish on Baruk Azhik for this. Baruk Azhik is the weakest of these, and essentially someone just needs to tell Anne Brown, who's the author, not to write a page and a half on the diet of the dwarves. There's this one is one of both the more wasteful, and therefore this is connected, least tense. You just become overthane. The other thanes are all fine, they're nice. That's kind of it. There's an interesting thing, I'd say the culture is interesting in that both it's highly egalitarian, it's the one of the three that's not hereditary. There's no expectation it would be. You are just the best candidate for the job, apparently. There's some sense that Moradin has chosen you, but you know, it's very egalitarian in that sense, and meritocratic. But, and there's a big but, also there's an expectation that everyone serves essentially the greater good. It's not incredibly collectivist by any means, that's not the theme, but rather it's traditionalist in terms of its ethics. You serve, you marry, you do jobs, you whatever, all based on the needs of the clan and of the wider city and of the kingdom. And that works well. But anytime, it's an odd one where Anne Brown seems to perhaps, as I've hinted already, just have the misunderstanding of lawful good as lawful boring. By that, I mean, nothing is ever really wrong. There might be some vague threats from outside, but the idea, for instance, clans might have rivalries but never fight. You think, well, no, in a lawful good domain, that doesn't mean that every single person is lawful good. And even if they are, there could well be real personal clashes. That's not uncommon amongst people who really do share beliefs, after all. There is an okay map. It is not the worst map, but it's not the best either. That is the city that you control. You've got then the fun stuff about Grim Greybeard, who's now like a ghost with weird powers. That's really fun, and he's only going to get more powerful. And he might help you, but he's learning about stuff, and you might need to serve him and do stuff for him. You then have the Thanes and priests, and they're all basically fine. I think the one fun thing actually is it Ruach Rockhammer, is that he's the High Priest of Moradin. He is doing an undercover temple effort into the other dwarven kingdom, Merkelad, which is a vassal of the great, most powerful Ornshalan, the Gorgon. And this is controversial, not just because it's dangerous for him, the Gorgon would hate it, and there might be war, but also because there's real, basically ethnic rivalry between these two groups of dwarves based on their, past politics. That's good. That's a good tension. It's not one that comes up very quickly or easily because it's not internal, but it is something which is there, and where you have a clash between an NPC's perfectly understandable, legitimate so far as it goes, desires to re-spread the worship of Moradin to his children so they can benefit, with the interests of the realm. And can you spin it to turn it into a good thing, or maybe not. The privileges of office, that's your palace, assets and holdings. This stuff's kind of okay, actually. The assets and holdings, though, still, yeah, it gives you, you've got special green steel called Moroscore. That's one of the better sections because there is a purpose to it. The difference between the cultural and history stuff in Baruk Azhik, where it's very, very bloated and not relevant, and this back half where suddenly stuff is relevant, is most pointed here because the front half is so weak. Holdings and descriptions of them, pretty typical. And then you've got, again, the rumours, secrets and plots. Here it is, rumours and secrets and plots, much like I think I just said that Binsada was. Oh no, sorry, this is rumours and secrets and plots. Ilien is rumours, secrets, plots. Binsada is rumours, plots, secrets. They're all different. It doesn't really make any sense. But here you've got the mock rumour table with trues and falses. The player shouldn't see that. This is exactly the problem. This is written for a DM. And then secrets and plots. There is a dwarf allied to the Orange, the Chimera, and he could be a real problem because he knows all about where you're from, probably. There's a lost city in a lost dwarven city, which maybe you could go and find. Maybe everyone's still alive there. It's a parallel society. Maybe they are all dead, or they all evacuated during the disasters around. I think is it around the battle at Mount Deismar, or sometime after that. But maybe they've all gone. But there's all this stuff to explore. Maybe there are weapons from an older, more powerful age that can help you with the Orog War. A cry for help. That's Merkelad. They want help. Some of them are actually coming to look to you for help, despite the ethnic hatred. That's great. There is a question about negotiating with the Orogs. That's not exciting, though it's interesting looking at the different ways that you could set up meetings with them. It gives you advice, basically. Recipe for disaster, the idea of setting up a trap for the Orogs. That's kind of okay. 2 paragraphs from it could be a sentence. Mystery and Rax Doxic. Lots of treasure, boring. Moradin's child. Weird skeletons, weird Moroscore green skeletons, which are presumed to be, or there's one, you have one, they're presumed to be the 8 first dwarves made in the world. At least the one you have is, and it's assumed there are 7 others. That's kind of interesting curio, but there's no real, because there's no mechanical weight to it and no real story to it. It's just an idea. The missing link is a new Orange. And that's actually a really interesting one, to be fair, where it's like, do you just trap it and keep it so it can't hurt anyone? Do you direct it against your enemies? People will be really angry either way if you're hiding an Orange or if you release it. Do you kill it? But then you might absorb the bloodline because of the way in which bloodlines transfer. And strategies are the back. Strategies, to be fair, again, are the best. This is the one thing where she wins, I think, where this book wins, is the idea that these are actual material strategies you could pursue that might be sensible if you want to do this particular objective, like a multi-step way of building unity with Merkelad. The gatefold is region map. That is more or less from the official cartography. Laws of Moradin's children from the 8 first. Palace of the Overthane and Visitor Centre, not really necessary. And lineage of the Greybeard Overthanes, which I guess you might be related to, because it's kind of become, it's because it had been a rotating monarchy and now it's sort of ended up in the same extended family. That's the one thing that's not egalitarian, but that's a weakness, that it doesn't really make sense how they've run stuff, and apparently no one else found it that controversial or whatever when whoever it was decided that they'd do that. And then there's the actual kingdom map, which is fine. Yeah, so I think that's a reasonable selection of what goes on in these books. It should give you an idea of whether you think they're any good. So despite my big criticisms of style, format, and the mix of information, and they are very substantial, they are one of the weaker examples of focus and purpose in second edition D&D because of that. There are plenty of other examples though as well, so it's they're not rare in that way. But what they're strong at is that they do give really interesting situations, all of them, but particularly in the small sample I did, Binsada and Ilien, give really interesting situations that develop the stuff from the box sets significantly. They're actually, you're like, oh wow, there's a lot going on here. The actual physical production is nice, and you can imagine enjoying using the sheet as a player, like the cover. And many of the rumours and plots are good ideas. They just need to be condensed. You basically need another book which sums up all these things in one big book. You need an or to put it differently, you need to double up the size of the region source books, if you want to put it that way. They lack, because of their nature, they lack very much hard information on adventures, and that means there's good ideas, but you as the DM have to do the running. And as a player, you can say to the DM, I'd love to do this, I'd love to go and find the lost city of the dwarves, but the DM then has to spend the time doing it. So it's not, in that sense, a making play easier resource. At its best, the Player's Secrets books are about making play interesting and making it conceivable to run a campaign in that context. So they're marginal. If you're into Birthright, if you're like, oh, I really want to run that, you might enjoy reading them. They might be useful. Certainly as a DM, you'll get lots of ideas from them, but they are not absolute core products. If you've read them, if you've used them, I know I have some Birthright players who comment on these things. Tell me what you think of them, what your favourites are, and your strengths and weaknesses for them. Tell me in the comments. Till next time.